Tom Blaze, the pioneer Kiowa fighting cattleman who owned Slash Ford, one of the toughest outfits in the West. Why he had not connected the two, Jim could not imagine, but the fact remains that Slash Ford had struck no responsive chord in his thoughts until now. And Tom Blaze was dead. Now it all fitted. The old Mother Hubbard saddle had been taken from Tom's horse, so this was the second time he had been shot. Earlier, perhaps when the cattle had been stolen, they shot him and left him for dead, but yet they had been unable to leave the saddle behind. For a saddle was 2 or 3 months' work for cowhands, and not to be lightly left behind. They had been sure of themselves, too. Sure until Gary had seen Blaze. Following them despite his wound. After that, they'd been worried. And Swaggle must have sighted Blaze the afternoon before, and then followed him and shot him down. When Slash 4 found Blaze dead, all heck would break loose. Dirksen knew that, and that's why he wanted out, but fast. And it was why Red Swaggle and Toby Langard had pushed so hard to get the cattle to Salt Creek, where they could be lost in larger herds or in the breaks of the hills around Double A. When he rode the buckskin down to the fire, the others were all around, moving around. Langard's face was swollen, and there were two deep cuts, one on his cheekbone and the other over an eye. He was sullen and refused to look toward Gary. Swaggle stared at the buckskin suspiciously, noticing the wetness on his legs from riding in the high grass and brush. Whatever the segundo had in mind, he never got a chance to say. Jim Gary poured up a cup of coffee and he held it in his left hand. Red, I want my money. I'm taking out. Mind if I ask why? Red's eyes were level and waiting. Jim knew that Swaggle was a gun hand, but the thought never disturbed him. While he avoided trouble, it was never in him to be afraid, nor did his own skill permit it. While he had matched gun speed with only one man, he had that sure confidence that comes from unerring marksmanship and speed developed from long practice. No, I don't mind. This morning I found Tom Blaze's body right where you killed him yesterday afternoon. I know that's Slash poor outfit. I don't want any part of this bunch when they catch up to you. His frankness left Swaggle uncertain. He had been prepared for evasion. This was not only sincerity, but it left Swaggle unsure as to Gary's actual stand. From his words, Swaggle assumed Gary was leaving from dislike of fight rather than dislike of rustling. You stick with us, Jim. He said, you're a good man. Like Mark said, that Slash outfit won't get wise, but there'll be a nice split on this cattle deal. I want no part of it, Jim replied shortly. I'm out. Let me have my money. I ain't got it, Red said simply. Ray pays us all off, and I carry no money around. Come on, Jim, let us a hand. We've only got today, and then we'll be at the head of Salt Creek Wash and get paid off. Gary hesitated. He didn't need the money, but before he was broke, he would need grub before he could go on west. Since he had come this far, another day would scarcely matter. All right, I'll finish the drive. Nothing more was said. Within the hour, they moved out. Yet Gary was restless and worried. He could feel the tenseness in the others and knew they too were disturbed. There was no sign of Rate for who should be meeting them soon. To make matters worse, the cattle were growing restive. The short drives had given them time to recover some of their energy, and several of them, led by one big red steer, kept breaking for the brush. It was hot, miserable work. The clouds still hung low, threatening rain, but the air was sultry. Jim Gary started the day with the lean gray horse he had ridden before, but by mid-afternoon he had exchanged the white animal for his own buckskin. Sweat streamed down his own body from under his shirt, and he worked hard, harrying the irritable animals down the trail that was now lined with pinyon and juniper, with a sprinkling of huge boulders. Ahead, a wide canyon opened, and not far behind would be the spot where he expected to find Ray with the payoff money. The big red steer suddenly made another bolt for the brush, and the buckskin unwound so fast that it almost unseated Gary. He swore softly and let the horse take him after the steer and cut it back to the herd. As it swung back, he glanced up to see Langer and Red Slagle vanishing into the brush. Where Dirksen was, he could not guess until he heard a wild yell. Swinging around, he saw a dozen hard-riding horsemen cutting down from the brush on both sides, and a glance told him that flight was useless. Nevertheless, Jeter Dirksen tried it. Slamming the spurs into his bronc, Dirksen lunged for the brush in the direction taken by Slagle and Langer, but he had made no more than a dozen yards when a rattle of gunfire smashed him from the saddle. His slender body hit the ground, rolling, flopped over one last time, and lay sprawling in sightless under the low-gray clouds. Gary rested his eyes on his saddle horn and stared gloomily at the strange little man, so badly miscast in this outlaw venture. Then horsemen closed in around him. His 6 guns were jerked from their holsters and his rifle from its scabbard. "What's the matter with you?" The voice was harsh. "Won't that horse of yours run?" Jim looked up into a pair of cold gray eyes and a leather-like face. A neat gray mustache showed above a firm-lipped mouth. Jim Gray smiled, although he had never felt less like it in his life. The horsemen surrounded him, and their guns were ready. "Never was much of a hand to run," Jim said, "and I've done nothing to run for. You call murdering my brother nothing? You call stealing cattle nothing?" "Sorry, friend. We don't see things alike. I call it hanging." "So would I, only I haven't done those things. I hired onto this outfit back down the line. $40 to the head of Salt Creek Wash, and they ain't paid me." "You'll get paid." The speaker was a lean, hard-faced young man with a rope. Another rider, a girl, pushed the horse through the circle. "Who is this man, Uncle Dan? Why didn't he try to get away?" "Says he's just a hired hand," Uncle Dan commented. "That's probably why this dead man would have said too," the lean puncher said. "Let me and the boys have him under the cottonwood we seen. It has nice strong limbs." Gary had turned his head to look at the girl. Uncle Dan would be Dan Blaze, and this must be the daughter of the murdered man. She was tall and slim, but round of limb and undeniably attractive, with color in her cheeks and a few scattered freckles over her nose. Her eyes were hazel and now looked hard and stormy. "Did you folks find Tom Blaze's body?" he asked. "They left him back yonder." Lifting a hand carefully to his shirt pocket, he drew out the envelope and tally sheets. These were his. "What more do you need?" the lean puncher demanded. He pushed his horse against Jim's and grabbed at the buckskin's bridle. "Come on, boys." "Take it easy, Jerry," Dan Blaze said sharply. "When I want him hung, I'll say so." His eyes shifted back to Jim's. You're a mighty cool customer, he said. If your story's straight, what are you doing with these? As briefly as possible, Jim explained the whole situation and ended up by saying, what could I do? I still had $4 coming. $40 coming. And I did my work, and so I aim to collect. You say there were 3 men with the cattle? With the herd? And the 2 who got away were Toby Langer and Red Slagle? That's right. Jim hesitated for Mark Ray and said no more. Blaze was staring at the herd and now looked at Jim. Why were these cattle branded Double A? That's a straight outfit. You know anything about that? Gary hesitated. Much as he had reason to believe Ray was not only one of those men, but their leader, he had hated to betray him. Not much. I don't know any of these outfits. I'm a Texas man. Blaze smiled wryly. You sound it. What's your handle? Jim Gary. The puncher named Jerry started as it was struck. Jim Gary? He asked. His voice incredulous. The one who killed Sonoma? Yeah, I reckon. Now they were all staring at him with new interest, for the 2 fights he had were ambulance had started his name growing a legend on the plains and desert. These punchers who had heard of him, probably from some grub line rider or drifting puncher. Jim Gary. Blaze mused. We've heard about you, old Steve's son, aren't you? I knew Steve. Jim looked up, his eyes cold. My father, he said grimly, was a mighty good man. Dan Blaze's eyes warmed a little. You're right, he was. What of it? Jerry demanded sullenly. The man's a killer, we know that. We found him with the cattle. We found him with some of Tom's stuff on him. What more do you want? The girl spoke suddenly. There was another rider, one who joined you and then rode away. Who was he? There it was, and Jim suddenly knew he would not lie. Mart Ray, he said quietly, of the Double A. That's a lie, the girl flashed back. What are you saying? You got any proof of that? Jared demanded hotly. We're talking about a friend of ours. He was a friend of mine too, Gary explained about Mart Ray. Why don't you turn me loose, he suggested then. I'll get Ray and bring him to you. Chances are Slagle and Toby will be with him. You'll get him? Jerry snorted. That's a good one, that is. Tie him, Jim said. Dan Blaze said suddenly. We'll go on to Salt Creek. Riding behind Dan Blaze was his niece, whom he heard him call Kitty. Jim Gary was suddenly aware, almost for the first time, of the danger he was in. The fact that it had been averted for the moment was small consolation, for these were hard, desperate men, and one of them, perhaps more, had been slain. Fear was something strange to him, and while he almost had known danger, he had almost passed over him, leaving him almost untouched. This situation conveyed only a sense of unreality, and until now, the idea that he might really be in danger scarcely seemed credible. Listening to these men, his mind changed about that. He realized belatedly that he was in the greatest danger of his life. If he had none of the talk to warn him, the mute evidence of Jeter's body was enough. And Jeter had died yelling to him, trying to give him a warning so he might escape. Now fear rolled with him, a cold cloudy fear that stiffened his fingers and left his mouth dry and his stomach empty. Even the sight of the scattered buildings of the town of Salt Creek did not help. And when they rode up the street, the red of the embarrassment crept up his neck at the shame of being led into the town. His hands crept tied behind him like a cheap rustler. Mart Ray was sitting on the steps, and he shoved his hat back and got to his feet. Beside him was Red Slagle. There was no sign of Toby Lags. Howdy, Dan. What did you catch? A hoss thief? Ray's voice was genial, his eyes bland. Looks like a big party for such a small catch. Blaze reined in with his horse and stopped the little cavalcade. His eyes went from Mark to Slagle. How long have you been here, Red? He demanded. Me? Slagle was innocent. No more than about 15 minutes, maybe 20. Just rode in from the Double A. Something wrong? Blaze turned his cold eyes on Jim Gary and then looked back to Ray. We found a herd of /4 cattle east of here, Mark. They were wearing Double A brand worked over our /4. How do you explain it? Ray shrugged. I don't, he said simply. How does that hombre you got with you explain it? Kitty Blaze spoke up quickly. Mark, did you ever see this man before? Did you? Ray stared at Gary. Not that I recall, he said seriously. You sure don't look familiar to me. Blaze, Gary said suddenly, if you'll turn my hands loose, I'll give you a gun. I can settle this in 3 minutes. I can prove he's a liar. I can prove that he does know me, and I know him. There's nothing you can prove with a gun that you can't prove without it, Blaze said flatly. Whatever you know, spill it, else you're getting your neck stretched. I'm tired of this fussing around. Jim Gary kneed his horse forward. His eyes were hot and angry. Mark, he said, I always suspected there was a streak of coyote in you, but I never knowed you to be this low down. I don't like to remind anybody of what I've done for him, but I recall a stampede I hauled you out of. Are you going to talk? Ray shook his head, smiling. This is a lot of trouble, Dan. Take him away and stretch his neck before I get sore and plug him. You'd be afraid to meet me with a gun, Mark. You always were afraid, Jim talked. That's why you left Red and Toby with the cattle. You wanted profit, but none of the trouble. Well, you got trouble now. If I had a gun, I'd see you eat dirt. Mark Ray's face was ugly. Shut up, you fool. You call me yellow? Well, everybody knows you're as yellow. He caught himself abruptly, his face pawing under the tan. What was that, Ray? Dan Blaze's face sharpened. Everybody knows what about him? If you've never seen him before, how can you say everybody calls him yellow? Ray shrugged. It's talking too fast, that's all. He turned and stepped on the sidewalk. He's your man, you settle your own war. Ray turned to go, but Jim yelled at him and Ray wheeled. Mark, I don't know you. How do I know you've got a white scar down your right side? A scar made by a steer's hoof. Ray laughed, but it was a strained laugh. He looked trapped now and he took an involuntary step backward. That's silly, scoffed. I have no such scar. Why don't you take off your shirt? Jerry said suddenly. That will only take a minute. The lean-jawed cow-face's face was suddenly hard. I think I remember you having such a scar from one time I seen you swimming in the San Juan. Take off your shirt and let's see. Mark Ray backed up another step, his face sharp and cold. I'll be damned if I take off my shirt in the street from any low-down rustler, he snapped. This here nonsense has gone far enough. Loose my hands, Jim pleaded in a whisper. I'll take his shirt off. Kitty stared at him. Her face was white and strained, but in her eyes he now saw a shadow of doubt. Yet it was Jerry who acted suddenly. Jerking him around before anyone realized what he had done and severing the bonds with a razor-sharp knife and jerking the rubbish from his hands. With almost the same gesture, he slammed guns into Gary's holsters. All right, maybe I'm crazy, he snapped, but go to it. The whole action had taken less than a minute, and Ray had turned his back and started to wait while Blaze waited in indecision. It was Red Slagle who saw Jim Gary hit the ground. Boss, he yelled suddenly. His voice was sharp with panic. Look out. Ray wheeled and he saw Gary coming toward him, shaving his wrist. He stood still, momentarily dumbfounded. Then he laughed. All right, Yellow, you're asking for it. This is one bunch of trouble you can't duck. You ducked your last fight. Furious, he failed to realize the importance of his words, and he dropped to a half crouch, his eyes ready above the gun's butts. It was Jerry who shook him, Jerry made the casual remark that jerked Mark Ray to realization of what he was facing. Looks like whatever Ray knows about him, he sure ain't heard about Jim Gary killing Miguel Sonama. Mark Ray was staggered. Sonama? He gasped. You killed Sonama? Jim Gary was facing him now. Some of the numbness was gone from his hands, but something cold and terrible was welling up within him. And he'd ridden beside this man, shared food with him, worked with him, and now the man had tricked and betrayed him. Yes, Mart, I killed Sonama. I ain't afraid, I never was. I just don't like trouble.